Okay, we're live now.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. This session, at the heart of what we're doing here today, is talking about staff experience. We're talking about employee voice. We're talking about hearing and listening each other in order to understand and in order to improve as an employer, as a provider of care. As we all know, there's a huge alignment between the experience of our staff and the experience of the people who use our services and the communities in which we serve. So welcome aboard for a 45-minute session with a panel of colleagues who can help to explore specifically the staff survey data from the National NHS Staff Survey, which was undertaken at the end of 2019, which was published across the whole of the NHS and for us earlier in March. So welcome to this session. For those of you on Zoom and Facebook Live, whether you're watching right now or later in the day, I'm glad you're showing some interest, whether you're a colleague, whether you're a line manager, a team leader. It's great to have you on board thinking and reflecting on this with the purpose of improving. So in one moment, I'm going to hand over to our panel. My job is trying to keep some order, if that's possible, in the next 45 minutes, and to allow people to ask questions, to respond, to have a bit of a play with some of this important data. I'm David Ware, the Workforce Director. I should have said that for those of you who don't know me. So our panel today is Gillian Booth. Sorry, sounds very formal, Miss Gillian Booth, but Gilly to many of us. She's the custodian of the process of the data and the narrative, and we're going to hear a bit about both of those things today as an anchor for some of our understanding. So we're going to have some slides, some data from Gilly. We've also got with us today Moira Screeton, Deputy Chief Nurse, am I getting the right title, here with a significant leadership role for that professional group, which is so important to us, but also someone who's seen quite a bit in CUH across a range of professional groups. So to guide us through that clinical leadership role. We've got Necka Smith, who's here, joining us at relatively short notice. Thank you, Necka, for joining us. As a member, well, as an employee, as a colleague, as someone who experiences their own working life, which we may all want to draw upon, but is also here on behalf of the LGBT+ and inclusion diversity representative. And this data has some really powerful messages around inclusivity. There is not one employee voice. There is 11,654 employee voices, of which we heard from 5,500 through the staff survey. And last but not least, we'll have Emil Brown, who Emil from the BAME Staff Network, Black and Asian Minority Ethnic Staff Network, but also a very practiced and helpful cultural ambassador in the organisation, as well as being a colleague. So thank you, Emil, for bringing all of those experiences into the room. So for those of you on Zoom, you may want to go onto gallery view so you can see the panel. And it's a relatively small panel, but hopefully will guide us through. And Tony, you're going to help us. People can post questions, comments on Q&A or comments. If they're on Facebook Live, you'll bring them through to Zoom for us as well. So please do throw in your thoughts. So this is important. It's about understanding. It's about reflecting. I hope we can all demonstrate that over the next 45 minutes. So Gilly, can you start us off with some data?
Thank you, David. Yeah, I'm just going to screen share. I'm hoping that everybody can see that. Thumbs up. So thank you to everybody that filled out the survey. That's the first thing I wanted to say. It means a lot when people take the time to you know, to invest that 5-10 minutes to have their say. And this year we had many voices with a lot to say. So 5,884 staff had their say this year, and that was 54% of staff. And it was the first time that we'd had a decrease in response rate in the last 5 years. It was a 1.5% decrease. But actually, I think across the board, we were probably expecting that to be quite a lot less. So really quite pleased with the level of engagement that we had with the staff survey. For some staff groups, their response rate was less than last year, and that probably not surprisingly was in the staff groups of allied health professionals and nursing and midwifery. And that was around 5% decrease for both of those staff groups in response rate. Overwhelmingly, there was a huge amount of free text commentary for this staff survey, over 9,000 free text comments, which is really significant, and probably more comments than we would ordinarily receive. We normally get around half that. And that really demonstrates that very high level of engagement, and that actually people really have a lot to tell us in terms of their experience at working at CUH. And some of the themes that have come through really strongly, which we have been feeding back to staff and across divisions, is the need that staff have to be recognised for their contribution, to be gaining feedback from their peers, from their managers, and to have support, and then also space, and whatever that kind of looks like and feels like for people. So what do we do with all of those individual voices? We amalgamate the positive scores, and I really wanted to highlight the fact that we amalgamate the positives, and in that sense it's an appreciative exercise, the survey, in that we look at the extent to which people have agreed or strongly agreed to sentiments. And they give us a trust overall score, and then from that we can identify any themes or priorities, and those results are then filtered to identify our patterns, our hotspots, and any trends, and then we use those throughout our networks and throughout our various steering groups. So what stood out for us this year, what's most and least improved from last year? You'll see on the left hand side here in the top table, most improved from last year are really focused on the health and well-being. So that continues the trend nationally, that actually we've followed suit there, and that speaks to the fact that that's been such a huge a huge priority for us as a trust, and obviously nationally in the NHS. The things that have been least improved are the things around team effectiveness, and in relation to people's job and managers at work. And this really just demonstrates and highlights how the pandemic has impacted on people as individuals at work and in their relationships at work as well. And again, that's a really strong theme that's been coming through. And then we look at the best and worst compared to the acute and community trust average. And again, you can see that we do really well in terms of the national picture in relation to health and well-being. And then we're below average on 3 of the questions around health and well-being in compared to other acute and acute community providers. So those results are grouped nationally, and they're put into 10 separate themes, and these allow us to benchmark our scores both nationally and then also with local other providers, system partners. And you can see that of the 10 themes, we've shown significant improvement within the area of health and well-being. And there is a decrease in 4 of the themes in relation to immediate managers, quality of care, violence, and then team working. So again, it's really kind of coming through that actually teams have been really impacted. We're below the national average for acute and community trust in 3 of the themes, and they are equality, diversity and inclusion, team working and violence. But we're above the national average for health and wellbeing, safety culture and staff engagement. And staff engagement is the extent to which we advocate for the organisation. So we use a range of scores. We use 9 questions to get our engagement score, and also we use 2 of those which are around the extent to which we would advocate, and that is recommending the organisation as a place to work, which was up on last year's, we're around 74%, and if we would be happy with the standard of treatment. And again, that was up to nearly 86% on that as well. So really, the key point here is to recognise that actually, even though we've really struggled at work and things have been really difficult over the last year, we're still getting behind the organisation and would advocate for it as a place for work and treatment. So I just wanted to really highlight some of the key themes that we echo this national picture, that we have shown improvements in health and wellbeing, and that reflects that significant effort that's been made across the NHS during the pandemic, and the extent to which we've supported remote working and people with caring responsibilities. So we've seen a 5% increase in the organisation taking a positive action on health and wellbeing, 2% increase in opportunities for flexible working, and a 9% decrease in people coming to work when they don't feel well enough. And it's disappointing but not surprising that staff experience at work has been adversely affected due to COVID-19. So almost half of the staff survey questions scored significantly worse, and the proportion of those were in relation to your job and your managers. Now, that does make sense when we think about the extent to which our roles have been impacted over the last year. 60% of CUH staff look forward to going to work, and 49% are involved in deciding changes that affect their work. And staff show a worse experience if they worked in COVID red areas or were redeployed into them, and that's borne through into those 10 themes that I shared previously. And also, we know that staff from minority communities, and that includes those with protected characteristics, that nationally and locally, once again, continue to have a less positive experience at work than those who do not. However, I'll finish on the things to celebrate. So we've seen improvements in recommending CUH as a place to work and as a place of treatment. And these are our highest scores ever. And despite everything, we've retained our staff engagement score. So that's the extent to which we're involved and motivated at work. So that's really significant. And despite everything, staff are proud to work here and want to advocate for the organisation. I'll hand back to you, David.
Thanks, Julie. We will come on to the panel in a moment. I wonder if you could put the slides down, Tony, for this bit of the conversation, although we may want to refer to some of those slides during the course of this discussion coming up. And we've got other background slides that we can include in the data should questions want to take us there. Julie, one of the things we learned during the staff survey was just how different a year it was. And we were undertaking this survey in the middle of it. And I thought it might be useful, and you provided me with this data, so I'm not taking any credit for this intelligence. 36%, so almost 4 in 10 of our staff worked on a COVID-specific ward or area during the course of the pandemic in the period leading up to December. About 1 in 5 had been redeployed as a result of the pandemic. 4 in 10, again, 37% had been required or able to work remotely or from home during the COVID period. And 10% had been shielding in some way for themselves or their family member for part or all of that period. And I think it's probably worth flagging up that bit of data, because it's been such, you know, a year full of learning, but a year full of such disturbance in our normal working practice, in our teams, in the people we interact with. And to hear the results that Jill has talked through in that context is a really interesting time to say the least. Okay, Julie, thank you so much for cantering through just a snippet of the data. There's piles of the stuff. Was it 9,000 or 7,000 narrative comments also that were made available to us during this process, and I know you and your colleagues are reading through them and getting themes. We may want to talk about that in a moment. Can I turn our panel then to Moira and ask you the question that I will ask all 3 members of the panel next. So what do you take from this? What are you interested in? What excites you, or is less depresses you, or whatever word we want to use for is less inspiring, or things you'd like to address over the coming months? So talk us through your.
Thank you, David. So I have reflected on this, and I suppose the thoughts that have come to mind is, as you said, it's been a really, really difficult year. I am humbled by the fact that people took the time to put comments in, the time to actually give us some qualitative data. And as Gilly said, this is anonymous, and that's the way it should be. But it will be great to be able to take themes from that, to be able to make it better. I suppose the other thing that I'm humbled by is, despite the year that's been in it, and despite the fact that people haven't been in their own teams and working with people that they're used to working with, and I think all of us who work in the NHS, we're all people's people, aren't we? We enjoy people, we enjoy teams, and to have that taken away is really unsettling. But despite that, staff are still saying that this is a good place to work, which shows, yes, we've been through such a challenging year, but we're in it together insofar as we're going to come through this and get back to some team working. So it doesn't depress me at all, this staff survey. It fills me with optimism from the fact that we can now work to improve the experience for our staff based on all that fabulous data that we've got, and to make things better for them. So they're my initial thoughts. I suppose the one concern I have in terms of, if you look at what's improved and maybe not is concerning me, is the measure around the staff environment and violence. I think we all come to work and to do a good job looking after our patients in whatever role we do and whatever way we contribute to that. And we need to feel safe. And that's something I think as an organisation we really need to maybe think about. And that for me, I would want people to feel safe coming to work. I'll pause there, David.
Thank you, Maura, and that optimist view, which is great, of saying actually whatever it is, we know stuff, we have data, we have feedback, we have a voice which is being used in our organisation. Absolutely, I'm gonna whatever the data is, I'm always going to come from that perspective now. Thank you, Maura. You've nudged me in that direction. We'll come back in a moment, perhaps, to some of the ways in which this may play out for the biggest part of our workforce, which might be nursing, which you can speak with some considerable authenticity about. But let's move on then to Neka. So Neka and Emil, one of the things that we consistently see, as Julie's mentioned, is a differential experience from staff. We don't have there's not one CUH employee. Many of us may look alike, many of us may not look alike, but there's not one experience that you can sort of say that's replicated 11,000 times. And I've been fascinated by the way to see the information we see in the survey about just how the voices vary. And it is concerning. It is great feedback, but it is concerning. So I'm not trying to lead you as a witness too far down that line, but from your position on the LGBT plus network, your interest in inclusion, or your lived experience of being in CUH, where did this survey take you?
So yeah, there's a number of areas it brought me to. So my role in the trust at the moment is I'm a diagnostic radiographer. So I'm one of the allied healthcare professionals, and I'm due shortly to start a secondment to work on the AHP student practice education facilitator role. So looking at how we encourage people to come and train here as students under the AHP umbrella. So for me, as positive as some of the feedback was, something that really jumped out to me was, why was there such a decrease in the response from AHPs? And how does that link into how AHPs are seen and their roles are seen within hospital work and care? You know, I know from being a radiographer, I had to shield first time round because we had so many COVID cases coming in through ED that we couldn't split safely, for me anyway, for some of us we could, into red and green areas. Everybody who came in, query COVID, needed a chest x-ray. So, you know, if anyone saw every patient who came into the hospital, it would be someone who's under the AHP umbrella. You know, the physios would have seen them to help with respiratory training, post-COVID, the occupational therapists would have been involved in assessing patients to get them back home and things like that. So looking at the response and the decrease, why is that? Is that a reflection of what's been, you know, portrayed in the media as well, where it's been, thank you doctors and nurses, here's a pay increase for the doctors and nurses? What about the rest of the hospital setup? What about the admin staff? What about the AHPs? And then for the second thing for me is the inclusion, the equality, diversity and inclusion. It's a very general bracket, that. As somebody who falls under several protected characteristics, what was the experience of those within the LGBTQ+ community? What was the experience of those that live with visible and hidden disabilities? What was the experience and the feedback from those within the Black, Asian, ethnic minority groups? I'm sure if we delved a little bit deeper and had some more data on that, it would be very interesting to see then what the experience of people who work in the trust was. So they were the main things that popped out to me, and they linked with what you said, David, about the fact that there is no one person or characteristic within the hospital. We're all individuals. COVID impacted everybody, not just those with protected characteristics. So I guess within the comment section, there would have been some sort of differentiation in there that could be further, you know, delved into and discussed.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful, Neka. And I mean, you've taken us through a whole arc of data. So appreciation. How do we show that we appreciate the contribution that all of our staff make? You know, we are not a newspaper headline who can sort of characterize the NHS by one or two professions. We have many, I forget the number, 100 professions in the NHS, all of whom we are proud and all of whom we clap. But does it feel like that? Particularly when staff, such as AHPs have done in the past 12 months, stepped into a very different role and have gained an awful lot of respect for what they've done in the way they've done it. And then you've taken us through to the different experiences of staff who may have different characteristics. And I'm pretty sure, well, we know what the data tells us, that minority groups, whatever protected characteristic we're exploring through the survey, show a different experience, almost exclusively a worse experience of work. But interesting enough, almost a prouder experience of the organisation. So the recommender scores from the minority groups are usually, if not always, much higher than the majority groups. Yet the experience is much less good, much less positive.
Yeah. So
we will explore that a bit more. But before we do that, we're going to hand over to Emil, and you're going to give us your slant on this this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I think before, I'd like to amplify a sentiment made by Maura about the violence and aggression, and that's just purely based on my work area. And I think staff, given the difficulty and the period of time we've gone through, staff have found it quite challenging, where there's quite a lot of frustrations and the need to feel they're protected and safe. And I think being in my area of work, being a PALS case manager, it's quite evident that we get, you know, feedback from cases we might deal with where staff have experienced these things and are unable to find a way of addressing it in a far constructive manner. But I think that's something we can explore in a bigger, wider of things. Now, my feeling now as a network co-chair, I think feedback from some of the members it was quite interesting and given a good insight on how people actually responded to the survey, and that's on that it tends to contradict what they actually want to say. So I think certain things which they would say in most cases, and I think there are greater positives. I'm trying to give a bigger picture here. There's quite a lot of positives, but at the same time, the challenges is extracting more truth to what they actually say in the survey. So one would say, you know, it was great to work in Division A. When you have a conversation with them, well, no, it wasn't that great, but because I don't see anything changes in the future, I've just put it there because I find it acceptable. And that's something one needs to look at, and why they can't actually articulate or elaborate on those areas of not feeling confident to be more transparent to what they're actually saying within the survey. So that was something I picked up from when getting feedback from certain network members. And that was the narrative in certain areas. So I thought on a bigger scale of things, maybe one would want to explore that to see why there's a sense of reluctance to be more vocal in certain aspects of it. And then hopefully we can all look at and have a conversation to address those issues they might have and look beyond that. So yeah, that's my view. You're mute. You're mute.
God, how many times have I done that? Emil, just to check your understanding, you're sort of saying that people may be reluctant to sit down, really scratch their heads and say, what do I want to feedback? What's my story? What's my voice? How do I want to use it?
Absolutely.
If I feel nothing comes from it, if I feel that I might as well just tick, everything's fine, leave me alone, move on. So there's your cry, your request is more focus on action or more sharing of what we're doing, what we're hearing with colleagues.
Yeah.
Okay. And from the network perspective, which you co-chair, you've had a chance to look at some of the data, and how has it felt seeing probably some of that lived experience playing out at such scale across the organization, such difference, the different experiences for people who have a protected characteristics in some way? How does that resonate? It appalls me that in our organization in 2021, predominantly the experiences will be different for some sections. How does that feel from being in that network when you talk about this? Is there anger? Is there, well, there you go, we told you so? Is there, when someone going to do something about this? What's the sort of nature of the conversation?
It's a mixture of emotions. It's a mixture of anger, disappointment, frustration, and you know, in some instances it might be very vocal because it's a safe place to have a conversation, and there are aspects where, you know, people just sit back and say, "Oh well, that's how it is," and we plod on. So I think it is we're taking steps to moving forward, and I think that is a positive. And one has conversations to look at the positives, and one has conversations to look at certain aspects of it and what changes are going to happen. So, and are building upon those potential changes. So I think as long as we've given a forum for a conversation to be had, and for that conversation to be taken out into the wider world of things, then we can see how best we can move forward with those things.
Thank you. I may come back to you in a moment and ask whether the experiences we're talking about through surveys align with what you hear as a cultural ambassador and as an employee, but I'll leave you to think about that for a moment, because I'm going to go back across to Neka, and then Moira, perhaps to think again about perhaps we can move on to thinking about what we've done about some of that, Moira. But Neka, where do you want to go next?
I just wanted to mention something that probably for most people didn't resonate, didn't really make much of an impact. But a lot of you will remember that during particularly the first wave of COVID, we had the rainbow for the NHS and everyone drawing rainbows and writing NHS on there. And it was a lovely, lovely sentiment. However, how did many of the LGBTQ plus community feel about that? Because the rainbow has been such an integral part of our identity, our way of showing that we are an active part of the community and being one of those protected characteristics, and also being a non-visible characteristic as well. And I think it particularly impacted those within the trans community under the umbrella, because under the surface during COVID and everything were lots of talks and changes and rules around trans people and what was going to happen about young trans people in schools and toilets, and all of this was going under the surface along with COVID, along with working in COVID conditions, and along with the rainbow being used as a signal of thanking the NHS. I know there weren't specific questions about that in the survey, but I do wonder how that impacted members in the network and whether they felt able to engage in the survey or able to discuss that in the survey, knowing that it probably was quite a small thing in other people's views, but to them was a really, really big thing.
Thank you. And as you say, sometimes when we talk about 11,000 people with 11,000 needs and experiences and points in time and how today is feeling for them, sometimes it's the small things which really resonate and become, well, they shape our understanding or a symbol of how an employer or how an organization may be. And my job here today is to facilitate and to help to have a good conversation about this. So I'm Switzerland, I'm neutral. But as a gay man, when the NHS started using the rainbow flag, and I cycle to work and I think, now the flag's flying, is it flying because we're a safe place or because we're celebrating the NHS? Both are great, but I no longer understand that.
I think where we could help with that is using the inclusive rainbow flag.
It will come. It will come. It will come. Thank you. We are absolutely as one, and I see there's a comment come through on the chat about that as well. Thank you for raising that. And the wider impact, the symbolism of small acts that we can all demonstrate to each other, which resonate with one of our colleagues at least, is important. Moira, to you, further thoughts and thinking about how this will play out, what action has been taken, will be taken, what we can do to influence this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this has been so valuable, this conversation, this really good conversation to hear different perspectives. And I think that is the way forward, isn't it? And, you know, listening to Emil's points around, you know, what's put on paper and what people really think. How do we bridge that gap? We're doing lots of work with our team leaders, the leadership team, Julie's team. They're doing lots and lots of work at the moment around how do we support our leaders more? How do we give them the resilience to be able to bring those teams back together and team build, but also to have those really proper conversations, Emil, around what is really behind what they're thinking. And I think it's a journey, isn't it? In terms of, it's not going to happen overnight. It needs us all to be engaged. It needs us all to role model it. It needs time. But I absolutely, truly believe we're on that journey. There is so much that we're doing with our team leaders in development to be able to have those conversations. And there's, and I suppose again to Emil's point about making sure that each individual is heard and each individual's feelings behind what they are trying to articulate, maybe in the staff survey that we're getting to, needs that equality, diversity and inclusion in all our, not wanting to sound hierarchical, but layers of the organisations, in all our teams that hold diversity, to be able to learn from each other, just like what we're doing here today, because I've certainly learned. And I think that's the way, you know, we need to be having these conversations. So I don't know if that really helps, David, in terms of things we're doing. I mean, obviously, from a nursing and midwifery point of view, we really recognise that sometimes communication and messages are translated in different ways to people. That consistency of communication, that consistency of decision making is really difficult to get right. And we're working on that as we go through this recovery phase and supporting staff coming back into their teams. But my sort of overall reflection is coming back to Neka and Emil's point about how we do it for everyone.
Maura, again, very, very helpful. We should have this conversation every day of the week. Because what you've brought us back to is the role of line managers, and this is not a centralized thing. This isn't something that Gilly can pump out a bit of data and where it can shunter on a bit and everything's fine. This is 600-700 line managers, 11,000 staff. It's about checking in with each other, and this year more than many, we've asked line managers, clinical leaders, to check in with colleagues about health status, about feeling safe, about whether people feel able to be in the workplace. And it's great that people said to us in the survey, when I felt unwell or didn't want to be here, I wasn't here, I left the building. That is a really good result at any stage, not least during an international pandemic. But it took conversations with line managers, and they have to continue if we're going to create a safe space to have those sorts of issues. It's not laying it just on the shoulders of line managers, but it's very important we get that right across the organisation, as well as corporately us doing the right thing as an organisation. Emil, can I come back to you? I'm looking at the time and just ask for your reflections, perhaps, if you're willing to talk about your role as a cultural ambassador, which is another way of getting feedback and supporting staff and giving them what they need, or being on interview panels, for example, to champion diversity. How that plays out for you to try and change some of this cultural stuff that we've been working on as a network lead?
I found it immensely beneficial, and I feel that that step going towards that area as a cultural ambassador and someone on interview panels, one as a personal development, I think it's immense, and I think it gives the confidence to especially minority ethnic staff to feel that they are recognized of their competence, their ability to contribute to a process, and to ensure to feel that that process is fair because they feel inclusive of that process. So with regards to the interview panels, I think that's one hurdle we've somewhat moving towards, and it's a very positive one, because I think it's an inclusive thing, but also a thing which ensures that people see fairness and people see that there's inclusiveness to that process. As a cultural ambassador and sitting on hearings or disciplinary processes, I think I think it's a continual journey. There's a lot of things we're learning from that, and educating line managers about understanding policy, understanding minority, ethnic, cultural aspects of individuals. So it's education and informing managers for them to understand that there's certain things within the trust as a whole, and understanding the what you call it, policy, that there's certain things you might, within your little catchment, you feel you might perceive as appropriate, but in the bigger world, it isn't appropriate and it's not acceptable. And there's certain things you have to follow suit with and understand. I think it's more of education of policy and understanding relationships too.
Thank you, Emil, and you keep on. Well, I keep on being reminded. You don't keep on reminding me, but I am reminded of the importance of engaging with the networks, because they give voice to some of the voices in the organisation, which are so important to hear. So thank you for keeping on doing that. Gilly, we haven't come back to you, and we're almost at the end. Before I want to show one more slide, is there anything you think we've missed or want to add? Or the data's out there, isn't it, for people to look at, and you're always willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Always willing to share. I think I probably just wanted to add that we look at these, we look at the priorities, we look at the data in the Workforce Experience Committee. That's something that we've been doing, and looking at how we can deep dive into that data as well to support line managers, in that piece. And I think, really just hearing the conversation today, it really brings to life a lot of the data. So it's one thing doing it, but it's a completely different exercise when you hear it. And I think, having sat with a lot of those comments and read through a lot of those comments, that feeling of don't overlook me and my contribution really came through. And I think that's something that we can all do with hearing sometimes, is just recognise that effort, and say thank you. And it's those really little things that make a really huge difference to our experience in the day, and having that kind of joy in your work. And one of the things that I read, which I remember a lot when I was reading those comments, was no decision about me without me. And I think that's something that we can all kind of remember on a daily basis, whether we're leading, managing, or just working with each other. And that's all I wanted to say. And I will just share the slides.
Well, Gilly, actually, don't worry about showing the slides, because I just wanted to, because I think it's really important to end on the personalization of this. We're trying to land data as people's experience. What I was intending to end with your support, but I'll just do it without the slide, is to say where this landed for me as the workforce director, and as conversations with the board and management executive and the workforce committee, was somehow, after the year we've had, we want to reform the ambitious workforce agenda that has been sort of slightly knocked off its perch a bit over the past 12 months. So the words which resonate for me, and I will keep driving forward with a whole range of other people, is about well-being, keeping that focus that we've seen so positively experienced in the most extreme circumstance, a focus on well-being and health, safety, psychological and physical. About resourcing, we went into the pandemic with a relatively good staffing position. We need to return to that relatively good staffing position. So a commitment to reducing vacancy levels. The ambition for our staff, the investment in education, learning and development has to return. The time has been lost. The funding is there. We need to assertively move forward with the education agenda. Inclusion, we've heard so many times, it is still concerning about that differential experience. Inclusivity for all 11,000, but particularly for the experiences of those with a protected characteristic. So driving out inequality because we were better when we do that, not because it's something that someone tells us to do, because we believe we're better for inclusion, and building solid relationships built on line managers, built on an organizational structure that respects the role of line and team and the organization. So building strong, compassionate, enabling working relationships. Those are the 5 concepts which sit with me and hopefully will resonate through the organization as well. So we have come to our end of our 45 minutes. It felt like 2 minutes. Thank you. I am going to, unless there's any final comments, I'm going to draw this panel to a close and say thank you so much for spending some time, for looking at the data and sharing your thoughts. And Tony, I'm going to bring this to a close with a jaunty wave. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.